functionality for OpenBrush, which is the open source version of Tilt Brush. I've been digging into the code base with the help of some of the original developers who've been really quite kind with their time. There's a Discord where you can join in and chat about open source Tilt Brush, but let me get to the point. So I'll show you. It's easier to show than explain. I'm going to start by picking a brush. The whole brushes work quite well. I'm going to then set a brush size, not too small, on the small side, but not massively small. And then I'm going to click this new button here. And that pops up this panel. Now I'll try and work around the bugs. It's still quite buggy, but I'll explain some of the limitations as I go. You can see there's a preview there of a cube spinning round, and because I'm on the Polyhedra tool, I can just click, and there is a cube. I can go in and choose a new shape category and draw any number of shapes. Let's just get rid of those because it gets messy quite quickly. So you've got broad categories of geometry of various kinds, and inside those you've usually got subtypes. Some of the subtypes have parameters, and that little preview updates in real time. So let's have a nice hexagonal grid, and you can see, there you go. Grids tend to get created quite large. I probably need to come up with more sensible defaults for the initial size for all of these. But you can move everything around after it's created. These are all just normal brush strokes. You can use the new experimental rebrush tool that is in any of the experimental builds of Tilt Brush. So let's try and find a funky brush. Not that one. I can never find the ones I like playing with when I start looking. There you go. Now you are currently limited to the brush stroke, the brush size that you picked when you drew them. I'm going to look into adding a tool that lets you change the width of strokes that are already drawn. I think that would be quite useful for this, probably useful for other artists as well. But I usually default to a brush size that's not so big, because then you get this, you get a little bit of overlap between the edges without it kind of without it kind of going into a big mess. You can see if I had a really big brush where the edges of the shapes join, you'd end up with kind of big bulging edges. So I'm going to show you, these are, I mentioned earlier that you can pick single faces and move them around. I'm considering switching it over so that by default it's all grouped, but for now you can select faces, group them, and then just use the normal duplicate with the A button on here and create copies. Another limitation at the moment is that you can't control the size or orientation of any of the shapes when you draw them. They're always created at the point you click with a kind of default orientation. I quite like it so that the first click sets the position and then you drag out to control the size and rotation. But for now you can just use the select tool and move them around like that. Like I said, rebrushing is quite fun because you can lay down a few shapes and then see what effect some of the weirder experimental brushes have on them. Where are we? Where's rebrush gone? Nope, it's on the experimental tab. So there you go. This is where it would be really nice to be able to increase the brushstroke size. Because some of the brushes, some of the strokes you would choose with one brush don't work so well with a different brush. So it's kind of would be very nice. Like the Mylar tube looks really nice, thick. Can't actually remember what happens when you I think the brush stroke size doesn't scale when you scale it. Let's select all of that. And then let's grab with both hands. Yeah, the stroke size stays relative as you scale it, so you can't kind of cheat and use scaling as a way of getting fatter strokes. So I will have to find a nice way of changing brushstroke size afterwards. Let me just clear all this mess up. I'll quickly talk you through the shape categories. The platonic solids are the standard 5 simplest regular polyhedra. All the faces and all the edges and all the angles are the same. Prisms has got 5 different variants, from simple prisms, anti-prisms, and more elaborate forms. Obviously some of the more, I think the simpler shapes are going to be much more useful to people, but I couldn't resist. I'd already got the code for all the different more exotic variants, so I couldn't resist putting it in. I don't know if this is really a tool that's going to be of broad interest, but at the very least it was a way of learning about using Tilt Brush to create procedural strokes and creating a sort of native looking UI within Tilt Brush. So I might turn my hand to something a bit more practical and of kind of more broad interest and usefulness after this. What was I doing? Oh yeah, I was going through all the shape types, wasn't I? So prisms, we've done platonic solids, prisms, Archimedean solids. Go and Google it. If I try and explain the difference between these categories, I'm going to get the details wrong. So I'm not going to try. It's all some really good stuff on geometry on Wikipedia anyway. So just go and look these terms up if you're interested. I'm going to keep clearing it because it's messy. Here's things start getting quite groovy here. We've got some really elaborate names like the Great Stellated Dodecahedron. I did actually have the ability to draw all the uniform polyhedra, but I've limited it to 4 categories at the moment. So there's some even more exotic ones hidden away that I might add in at some point. So those are subsets of the uniform polyhedra. We're now on to, I used to call this category Johnson solids, but really they're not. Only, for instance, with an elongated pyramid, the only one that's a Johnson solid is the 4-sided and I think the 5-sided variants, but I've loosened the constraints so you can go higher. A true Johnson solid would have regular polygons for every face, but I've just taken the general principle. I suppose you could call them pseudo Johnson solids or something like that, but I've decided to go with the term radial polyhedra. There's various variants here that may or may not be useful. Lots of flying saucers and spaceships in there. Where are we? Waterman Polyhedra are interesting because they are slightly less regular. If you want something that's got a nice blend of regularity and randomness, they're a good compromise. Again, I'm not going to try and explain the mathematical definition of them because I'll get it wrong, but if you Google for Waterman Polyhedra, there's loads of stuff out there. In fact, let me try a smaller brush size because you can't really see the shapes very well. Here, I'm going to choose smooth hull, and I'm going to go down to a fairly small brush. There's one of the bugs I mentioned is every time you pick a brush, you've got to switch back Polyhedra mode on, which annoyingly brings this back to its default position. Even if you've docked it, it just does that. So I've got to find a way of only opening the panel if it's not already open. So I was talking, here's a Waterman Polyhedra, and you can see I've made the brush size smaller, so those edges are better defined. They're not kind of blobby and overlapping like they were before. Oops. There's lots of different variations there. Let's get on to the last two categories, grids. You've got all the obvious regular tilings of the plane. Let me, because they tend to be huge, I'm going to take the size right down. Oops. Now it wouldn't do anything because I wasn't in Polyhedra mode. There we go. The choice of colouring is a bit arbitrary at the moment. Again, I'd like to build a UI so that you've got more control over how these are coloured. I just went with a colouring method that was varied and interesting. And you can always recolour them using the normal recolor tool. But yeah, it takes a while to do all the proper UI for this stuff, so I'm being a bit sparing in what features I'm exposing. But there's a lot of functionality under the hood. Let's see, what have I got here? So yeah, more various tiling patterns. The grids, these numbers behave a bit strangely for some of the other ones. I should try and make that a bit more intuitive. Like, it's not really clear what you're getting 7 and 8 of when you pick these sliders, but at least you get preview so you can see. I think we've only got one category left, which is other, which is just a dumping ground for any shapes that I couldn't think of a better category for. So there's a few weird inconsistencies in there, like the C and the H shape are flat, but the L shape has got depth. I can fix all that. Some of it I left in because of compatibility with a bunch of presets I've already made. I don't want to have to go in and fix those, so I've left the kind of weird inconsistencies in there. A few of these are buggy. I don't think the gridded cube is behaving correctly at the moment. It's not supposed to have that big gap in it. And last time I tried, the polygon didn't work. Yeah, that's broken at the moment, so it's on my list to fix. But there's a couple of useful shapes in here. I've put a kind of arbitrary limit on the number of segments and slices you can put these on, but it doesn't seem to slow it down too much. I could probably bump that up to a bit higher without bringing the machine to its knees. I think obviously this is running on a PC. If I was running this on the Quest, I'd have to keep these limits quite low. But yeah, it seems to cope quite nicely. I suppose compared to the kind of stuff that someone would hand draw with tilt brush, where you could be drawing for ages and have tons of strokes. These aren't I'm not creating that much geometry here. I'm sure if I tried hard enough I could crash my computer. There you go. I think I'll stop there. This I haven't managed to flood my lines too much. This is an off-the-cuff demo. I hope some of this made sense. And come on the Discord. I'll put it in the description, and I'll give a link. This is all open source, so I'll give a link to the GitHub repo as well. Thank you.